Today is World Cancer Day, and it's a sensitive subject because there are surely going to be people who are watching this who are either suffering or have loved ones who are suffering from a disease that seems to have swept the planet in the last few decades. It's quite fascinating when we discover that there are parts of the world that are completely untouched by cancer, that there is this thing that seems to go hand in hand with our modernization and our civilization. And I think it can be argued quite persuasively that perhaps the origin of cancer is our disconnection from a much broader self, a much broader sense of who we are in the natural environment into which we have been born, out of which we have grown. What do I mean by that? Cancer cells are cells within the human body that break out on their own. They start to see themselves as separate from the whole and start to try to accumulate resources to bolster their own strength, to grow independently of the organism in which they were birthed. Apparently, all of our bodies are full of latent cancer cells, and it very much comes down to whether it seems to be due to a combination of environmental triggers and our emotional responses and spiritual sense of self that determines whether or not these cancers develop into full-blown cancer. And I mean, to me, it seems very clear that there's a metaphor here between that cancer cell that breaks out on its own and is seeking to protect itself, establish itself separate from the whole organism of the human body, and how we have been trying to survive as humanity in these last few centuries. We've seen ourselves as separate from our environment. We largely see the environment as something hostile from which we need to protect ourselves from each other. Our trust in the Earth's capacity to provide for our needs seems to have been powerfully undermined, and so there's this ongoing struggle to survive that typifies human beings in the modern world, it seems to me. And so that for me very much parallels the way in which a cancer develops. It ultimately sees itself as cut off and alienated, and so then has to feed off its host in order to survive. I've been fortunate enough to know a number of people who have had cancer and survived, and one in particular whose survival was almost exclusively due to fasting. And I think it's really interesting that just abstaining from eating and continuing to consume can be enough for a cancer to relinquish its hold and let go and ultimately be dissolved back into the one of the human organism. And it's interesting because there are so many people who have sworn with their lives that they have been healed by all manner of different natural remedies, which is fascinating because none of them have been proven by science. And we can hear our scientific friends saying, well, where are the studies, and yet how can you deny the testimony of people that are like, no, that person was on death's door, they got diagnosed stage 4, and they tried this thing and it completely, and now they're fine. Did in every one of those cases, was it just due to fluke chance? I feel that there's a certain hubris, a certain arrogance to wanting to dismiss all personal testimonies because they didn't take part in a study. And yet it's very interesting because we only need to know one person who has survived cancer through some natural thing. And recently I've just seen a friend whose partner has been diagnosed with cancer, and there was this enormous pylon of hippie remedies that people said, oh, you can do this and you can do that, and scientists saying, oh no, this is a genetic, people having this pylon of advice and these very strong assertions that are sometimes very weakly founded. And I doubt whether any remedy really probes at what it is that really is at the cause of that cancerous growth. And for example, when I think of this person who went through this extreme process of fasting in order to, well, for her cancer to ultimately detach itself, she didn't just go through a physical process, it was a spiritual process. It's impossible to fast for really extended periods. I'm talking 40 days plus on multiple occasions. It's impossible to go through that process without reconnecting with our spiritual self. It's a humbling process, it's a stripping out, and it's very difficult to not have some kind of epiphany in the course of that kind of fasting. Now, it's very interesting when it comes to environmental triggers. There has been so much documentation showing how since the introduction of Roundup, this very powerful herbicide that is used in agriculture around the world, you can see on maps the incidence of cancer and how closely it matches the concentration of Roundup that has been found in waterways. And it's, what's the other name for it? Glyphosate. This particular chemical is like a natural antibiotic, and it attacks living things, and it's everywhere now because of the way it's entered the water system. We can find it in raindrops. It's everywhere. We cannot get away from it. It's in our water from our taps. So it's no wonder when we think that we are putting these anti-life chemicals into our agricultural system and therefore into ourselves that we wouldn't be suffering the consequences of that. And then add on top of that the effects of the menstrual the contraceptive pills and the antidepressants and the heart drugs and all the other chemical drugs that basically pass right the way through our systems directly into the water system, and that are everywhere. They are so pervasive. They've been identifying, the drugs of our society and the illicit drugs like cocaine in little streams that people can find around. I mean, they're just, there's no escaping from the fact that we have been toxifying our environment. Now, whether we can heal ourselves by further toxification, things like chemotherapy and stuff, there may well be cases where that does happen. But I put that down to the resilience of life. When you irradiate something with really hardcore chemicals, it's just nearly everything dies. And then the question is whether or not the system of the human body is resilient enough to go through such a stripping away. A little bit like with fasting, I guess, except without all the chemicals. So, in conclusion, the mystery of cancer, we're just beginning to understand it. There's no doubt that the growth of cancer, excuse the pun, has absolutely gone hand in hand with the growth of civilization and our willingness to toxify our planet. So is there any cure to cancer? I really don't believe that the cure for cancer lies in some pharmaceutical cupboard somewhere, which is undoubtedly been suppressed because it would undermine the lucrative cancer industry that has grown up in big pharma around this particular disease. If cancer cures have been found that exist in syringes. I really doubt they will ever surface. And I doubt that they will ever be truly effective, because until we take our place in this natural world and find a way to live in harmony with our environment, it seems that errant cell inside of us that then starts to try and absorb from its surroundings to protect itself will forever remain present to the human experience. So these are my thoughts on cancer. I hope they don't cause offence, but raise questions that are worthy of our collective consideration.